Erik Snyder is our host and moderator of the next session, and the next session is on Drawdown. Some of you who came in 2016, you would have seen Paul Hawken as our keynote speaker about Drawdown. It is an incredible book. Hundreds of scientists worked on identifying the major solutions to climate change. This session is all about that, and Erik is going to be moderating it. He has developed an investment fund to focus capital on those major solutions for climate change. We have Katherine Wilkinson, who is the senior writer and editor of Drawdown, and we have Katherine Nimi from Walmart, who has been informed and inspired by Drawdown to build the gigaton project at Walmart to get to those massive emission reductions we need. With that, team, come on up.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Sun Valley Forum, for having us today. Just as we start, before we dive into it, can I get a raise of hands if you've read Project Drawdown, if you're familiar with the book? Okay, next question. A raise of hands if you would describe Walmart as an impact company. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about Project Drawdown. Katherine's going to start and give a little bit of an overview among a very familiar crowd, which is wonderful. We're going to keep it pretty quick, and then Katherine's going to talk to us about their efforts at Walmart. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at the Drawdown Fund. We're going to try to keep it quick and get to your questions. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Katherine Wilkinson, who's a dear friend, who is the VP of Communications and Coordination? Engagement at Project Drawdown, and also a senior writer there. So, Katherine?
Thank you, Erik. Can you all hear me? Great. Oh, excellent. Yeah, let's do this quickly, given how many of you are familiar with Drawdown. Anyone not at all familiar with Drawdown? Don't be ashamed. Okay, perfect. Can we get the slides back? Perfect. We're going to start where every good and rigorous climate conversation starts, which is with emojis, obviously. No, I think it's useful to set Drawdown in the context of the kind of dominant climate discourses, because we are very intentional about upending some of those and trying to transform some of the conversation around global warming and climate solutions in particular. So if you think about kind of step back to a 10,000-foot level, the story that we are telling about climate change goes something along these lines, right? The science tells us it's bad. We need look no further than outside today. The science tells us it's likely to get really bad. We are headed towards a potentially unlivable planet, and we're not super well equipped as a species to change course. So folks, change your light bulbs, recycle your Coke cans, and cross your fingers. Right, that someone in the halls of power or some brilliant inventors in Silicon Valley will sort of sort this thing out. There's lots of incredible science behind this narrative, but when it comes to human psychology, it has totally failed us, right? It leaves people feeling overwhelmed, confused, disempowered, guilty, ashamed, on and on and on. It basically tells us human beings are terrible, horrible, no good, very bad, greedy, lazy, incompetent, and all the rest. And go get going, right? It's like, this doesn't work. And we tried to bring sort of the other side of the story to life in this book, Drawdown, and through the research that sits behind it, through a global systems model of the 80 most substantive solutions that are already in hand, already being used, already working to get to the point of Drawdown to reversing global warming within 30 years. This work really was born out of a set of questions that sort of persistently plagued Paul for a number of years, right? We have this incredible body of science about the problem statement of global warming and climate impacts. But where was the list, right? Had anyone done the math on a comprehensive suite of solutions to actually understand what is possible in the face of a problem, a crisis that seems often impossible? We're a growing global collaborative. Over 65 research fellows have worked on the project to date, and a new cohort is starting this fall. They come from 6 continents, 22 countries. It is really, I think, an incredible model for the kind of work we need to be doing. Just very quickly, as a kind of definitional moment, drawdown refers to the point in time at which greenhouse gas concentrations peak and then begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. I was in Jackson, Mississippi with a big auditorium of 8th graders, and one of them said drawdown was which I think sort of sums it up pretty well. It is actually about the threshold at which we could head back to conditions that are most conducive for life on this planet, which is a very different kind of goal than we talk about most of the time, right, in the climate space, of sort of slowing emissions, reducing, stopping, but still heading towards a cliff. And we wanted to put forward a goal that was both more aspirational, but also easier for people to understand, right? 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, these are totally meaningless to 99% of the world. What we found as we kind of dug into the research is that humanity has actually been creating a plan to get to drawdown. We just had never pulled that plan into one place before, right? Because we've been on university campuses and in laboratories and factories and halls of government, on farms and in forests, kind of testing different technologies and practices, learning what works, what doesn't, iterating, trying again, sometimes going back into kind of the annals of human history to reclaim ancient practices that have a really important role to play today. So the job for us at Drawdown was not to invent what we think the most comprehensive plan is to reverse global warming. It was actually to gather and codify the collective wisdom of humanity and then share it back in a way that is not another dry, wonky, impenetrable climate report. Because I don't know about you all, those are not page turners as far as I'm concerned. But we really have tried to be as artful in the communication as we have been rigorous in the research, and make this work really accessible to anyone. And indeed, it seems to be getting used in classrooms in ways that suggest that's been successful. We look, of course, at both sides of the equation, right? We talk mostly about avoiding sending emissions up. Drawdown looked at that, but also at a whole host of regenerative agriculture practices and ecosystem restoration practices that actually bring carbon back home. Excited about what's up tomorrow on the bring carbon back home front. And I say that also just because I think it's worth raising the need to be more thoughtful about how we talk about carbon when we talk about climate, right? Carbon becomes this sort of evil villain when actually it's just an issue of balance, right? About where the carbon is and what we have done with it. And I think we sell ourselves short and we sell climate solutions short when we focus on no carbon, zero carbon, decarbonization. Our work is organized around these sectors. The 80 solutions, the 80 extant solutions fall into these groupings that both organize the book and the digital platform, but also the models. And we also looked at what we call 20 coming attractions, so more nascent technologies or practices that are perhaps still in R&D. Maybe they're out in the world, they're working, but we don't have the kind of data that we needed to be able to do the same sort of modeling. Very quickly on the math, and this is one of my favorite unsung heroes of the Drawdown suite, Silvopasture, which clocked in at number 9 out of 80 solutions. We looked at, if you take any given solution and scale it vigorously but plausibly over 30 years as part of a system of all the other solutions, kind of how much juice can it squeeze? How much impact on emissions reductions can it have over that time? And everything is translated into CO2 equivalent if there are solutions that don't address carbon dioxide, but address other greenhouse gases. So we were able to do this apples to apples ranking. And then we also looked at the economics of the solutions. So what's the net cost to implement? And also, in most cases, what are the operational savings over 30 years? This is what Drawdown looks like as a system, and I like it because it makes me think about all these sorts of shapes that you see in nature, right? And I think there's a tendency to focus on the right half of the pie chart, but a whole system created this challenge, and we need a whole system to solve it. So there is actually no such thing as a small drawdown solution. So even in this kind of era of BuzzFeed, when we seem obsessed with top 5, 10, 20, we need all of these solutions and then some. There are a few, I think, interesting insights worth just calling out. One is that 8 of the top 20 solutions, and the largest sector for potential impact overall is food, not electricity. Electricity is 5 of the top 20, so obviously critical, but again, when we think about kind of what dominates climate discourses and particularly conversations about solutions, energy is getting most of the attention, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. The designer on this slide could have been more interesting than using pink for educating girls, family planning, and women smallholders. Nonetheless, I will just also point out that Drawdown lifts up the opportunities, key opportunities around advancing gender equity that are things that we should be pursuing in and of themselves, right? They begin and they end with rights for women and girls and well-being and opportunity, but they also happen to have positive ripple effects on emissions. This is also not an area that we were talking about. We do not think about educating girls as being a top 10 solution to reverse global warming. I think it's also, when you sort of look at all of these together, you start to see that this is as much a human story as it is a sexy tech story. It is as much a story about ancient practices as it is about innovation. And so I think there are lots of really rich lessons that come out of this work. But this is the blueprint of possibility as our research has brought it together. And there are footholds of action for every individual and institution on the planet. I think I'll leave it there.
So, per Katherine's comment, there are opportunities for everyone to get engaged. And the question I posed earlier was how many people thought Walmart is a impact company. I'd actually make the suggestion that they're one of the original impact companies, delivering low-cost products to places that couldn't originally get them. They employ 2.3 million, 2.1 million people, 2.3 million people around the world, and they have an amazing, amazing project right now, which is aiming to take 211 million, the equivalent of 211 million cars off the road for an entire year. Today we have with us Katherine Nimi, who's going to talk to us a little bit about her role as head of ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance within Walmart and driving their strategy. So, Katherine.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and I appreciate that you didn't sort of clarify what kind of impact company, because I think people could have raised their hands depending on how you frame that question a little bit differently. But I'm really excited to be here, and I thought I would just sort of start with sharing one of several of our sort of stories of origin for our global responsibility work. And that was back about a little north of 10 years ago. There was this critical event that hit the United States, and that was Hurricane Katrina. It was devastating. We felt it keenly. Our associates were impacted, our stores were impacted, and our customers were impacted. And we sort of, I mean, it was a time when our reputation was something in tatters, and people really didn't like us and didn't trust us, and were really questioning our role in society. And we sort of just took a moment, took a beat, and responded, and did what we do best, which is logistics and supply chain. And we threw a bunch of food and a bunch of materials and a bunch of aid onto a bunch of our trucks and sent them into the affected region, and sort of just dropped everything and tried to help out the communities that were impacted. And there's this picture that is really famous within the Walmart circles of a bunch of Walmart trucks lined up waiting to get the green light from the federal authorities to go into the impacted zone and render aid. And if you go today into our CEO's office, that picture has been turned into a painting, and it's what stands, or what hangs behind his desk. And our CEO at the time, Lee Scott, sort of asked that question because there was this moment. I mean, it was a terrible moment in our nation's history, but for us at Walmart, it was a moment where we sort of saw the potential of the role that business could play in society. And it was sort of a fundamental paradigm shift for us. And he sort of asked the question, we were a really great company that day. What if we were that kind of company every day? And that's what really sort of sparked our focus, and I think brought to life our mission statement, which is to help people save money and live better. Now, certainly we advertise an awful lot of the saving money side of that, but the live better is really sort of the North Star that helps guide and inform all of our work. Our business strategy is fundamentally oriented around a concept called shared value, which is where we're looking to find ways to deliver business value and societal value. And when I talk about business value, I'm certainly talking about cost, but also things like supply security, customer trust, all of those sort of things that are fundamental to a business. And then when I talk about societal value, I'm talking about things like economic mobility, climate change, all sorts of things where we can do one sort of thing that delivers both business and societal value. Our focus in global responsibility broadly, before I get into Project Gigaton, is oriented around three core philosophies or approaches. The first is opportunity, and that's all about our work to provide great jobs and make Walmart a great place to work. And just as a sidebar, I've been really heartened to hear all of the discussion today on the need to think about economic mobility and development and really think how we can sort of bring and bridge environmental work with social work so that we're really solving these problems together. Our second priority is sustainability, and I'll get back to that. And then our third is community. So really thinking about how we can be a great company in the communities where we operate. And that's a lot of our work on disaster relief, hunger relief, and things of that nature. Within sustainability, we've got three overarching aspirational goals: a commitment to 100% renewable energy, zero waste, and then products that sustain people and planet. There has been, I will say, an increasing focus, particularly on the supply chain side, the sort of products that sustain people and planet, and really weaving in how do we start to address some of these human rights issues and social issues that are occurring very, very deep in the chain. But sort of stepping back and thinking about our 100% renewable energy goal, we're competitors, and so we want to win. And we thought we had been doing really, really great work on renewable energy. And then all of a sudden, there was this conversation that started happening before Paris. And I was partly responsible for it because I came from the World Wildlife Fund and moved into Walmart, and all my friends at WWF were talking to me about science-based targets. But essentially, it was this idea of, all right, so our policymakers globally need to hear from big companies, and in particular big US-based companies, that action on climate is good and good for business, and that 2 degrees feels like an achievable goal. So we agreed to set a science-based target. I traveled to Paris with our former chairman of the board, Rob Walton, and I Googled him, and he's like the 11th wealthiest man in the entire world. And if you knew how freaked out I was about losing him on the streets of Paris. But at any rate, he made it back home. All is good. And then we sort of set our target, and our target is within our own operations, so scope 1 and 2, an 18% absolute reduction. And then within our supply chain, Project Gigaton, and that's a commitment to pull a gigaton of greenhouse gas emissions out of the atmosphere by 2030. And we sort of took a step back, and we were inspired by sources like Drawdown and others to try and figure out, okay, how do we think about a supply chain as vast as ours? I mean, we're enormous. And so how do we start thinking about what are opportunities that our suppliers can take to take action on climate? And so certainly we identified 6 pillars, one of which is sort of the obvious one, which is energy use. A second one, which is product use. So are the things and the products on our shelves things that customers can put in their home, be it an LED light bulb or a smart thermostat, so that they can take action on climate on their own. But it's other measures like sustainable agriculture, waste, packaging, and deforestation. So we tried to draw inspiration from what are 6 major areas of work where we can sort of see companies taking action. And what I like about it is that so often people get sort of tripped up in this, like, I have to do this one thing or I have to do energy efficiency. What I think people don't appreciate is, and Drawdown does a great illustration of this, there are so many ways that you can take action, and we actually need all of them. We need a sort of holistic solution if we're going to make the kind of transformation that we need on climate. And I'll give just a couple of examples. I mean, our work on energy use is aligned with Drawdown number 2, which is wind turbines, Drawdown number 8, which is solar, our work on waste. So just as a side note, we're the world's largest grocer. So when we see big opportunity, it's in tackling something like both food waste and sustainable agriculture, where there are opportunities on nutrient management and food waste and all sorts of things. So really trying to figure out and how to tell our supply chain, which certainly consists of the groups of like a P&G or an HP, folks that are really, or a Mars, that are really leading a lot of work on climate, but it's also the person who's selling the T-shirts for the local sports team in maybe 5 Walmarts. So we've got to come up with a solution that's going to work for the big suppliers, the medium suppliers, and the little suppliers. And we've got to come up with an intervention that I think works for everyone, where they've all got sort of a place to get started that makes sense for them. So I'll pause there.
Amazing. So I have a 7-year-old son and a 5-year-old son, and they're my why. They're probably not the why I'm here. But about 2 years ago, a dear friend asked me the question of, if you had $1 billion, what would you do to benefit 1 billion people? That set me off on an incredible journey. Some of you may know that right now, and that's a really easy answer for you. But for me, it was a really thought-provoking question. And it led me to look at 22 different challenges or opportunities. I'm a naive optimist. I look at the world as possibilities. And it set me off on this journey to look at the world and develop my own theories of change. And it led me to partnering with Paul Hawken, who is the co-editor of Drawdown and launched the Drawdown Fund. So the Drawdown Fund is a growth capital fund that is focused on reversing global warming and delivering a market-based return. So when we looked at the world and we looked at the solutions, Katherine talked about the 100 solutions, 20 of which are coming attractions, so kind of earlier stage. The data doesn't really exist yet. The balance of the solutions, the 80 solutions, require about $27.4 trillion. Tons of investment opportunities for everyone to get involved in. Then we looked at them and said, okay, out of those 80 solutions, looking at our theories of change, we can use business like Walmart as a entrepreneur, investor, and business operator. I kind of default to business as a force for good. I think I would call myself an evolved capitalist or a reformed philanthropist, one of the two, to be determined. But we looked at that and said, hey, of those solutions, there are different ways to create change. You could use market-based forces, which is my preference. You can use policy. I think I'm not going to make any political comments, but we all know that policy can change really quickly every administration. Right, so not that sustainable necessarily. Or you can use culture and movements. And that can be really, really powerful, but that can take generations. So we looked at the world and said, hey, there's a huge need here, And of these 80 solutions that are scalable and can be implemented today, that's part of the beauty of Drawdown and all the work Katherine and Paul and their team did, is it's stuff that's ready to be implemented today. We looked at those 80 solutions and said, okay, 54 of them are appropriate for market-based interventions. Of those 54, we took a look and said, okay, of those 54, who's getting money right now? Infrastructure for wind or solar is getting pretty well funded. We looked at it and said, okay, we're going to drill into the places where we think we can deploy catalytic capital, and we identified 16 drawdown solutions that we've kind of reformed with an investment lens to say, hey, we're focused on these 10 different sectors, which we define as 3 different systems around distributed energy, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable cities. So we have a $500 million fund deploying between $10 and $50 million checks in those 3 different systems, and we're hoping to make a big difference. We're, to our knowledge, the first fund of at least our scale to ever suggest a carried interest associated with impact. So 50% of our team's economics is tied to the CO2 sequestration or emissions reduced, as audited by a third party. So there's tons of opportunities to get involved, whether it's through investing, whether it's through philanthropy, policy. I think Walmart's an amazing example of a company that has taken that on themselves. If you're running a company, you can look to Walmart. If you're looking for different ways to engage, I highly encourage, if you haven't read Project Drawdown, there are a lot of ideas there. But to that, I will pause. We will take questions. I think we have time for that. Perfect.